This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
So Magnus Carlsen is the world chess champion. He's also, by the way, been number one in the world for fantasy football, which is interesting to be number one in the world for two different things. But it shows if you're extremely skilled at one thing, you might be great at other things, be able to translate those skills over, which is a big part of what I write about in Skip the Line. But I had an interesting day today. I played Magnus Carlsen's father in a speed match on chess on a website that they partially own, the Carlsen family partially owns, chess24.com, and it's part of the Play Magnus Group, which I just realized is a public company in Norway. They basically rolled up or bought a bunch of very good chess-related companies and combined them together and built a significant company. So we played a match, the 60-year-old Henrik Carlsen and me. Henrik is very strong. He's had a good teacher in his son, I imagine, who's the world champion. It was tough games. And then the Scottish GM, Simon Williams, otherwise known as the Ginger GM, who's very popular on Twitch, did some commentary for all 6 games, and it was very funny to watch him do commentary on the games. But Henrik won 4 games to 2. It was a very good match. He's a very strong player. But I think I held my own. They were fun, and they were blitz games. There was some sloppiness on both sides. Blitz meaning they were very fast games. But it was fun, and it was a prelude to talking about adult improvement and Henrik Carlsen's view as a father of the growing world champion, and also how they monetized the chess with their company Play Magnus. And we had a very interesting conversation. It was very, very fun, very interesting conversation. I like to do things with the guests that are more than just podcast, kind of put some, atmosphere around the podcast. Then after the podcast, stay tuned, because I want to kind of break down a little bit what Henrik was saying about adult improvement and kind of the raising of a world champion. And I do this because I think a lot of people, you might have noticed this is a theme on a lot of the podcasts about how to be a peak performer. And everybody's trying, or perhaps everybody is trying or would like to be a peak performer in their life, whether it's as an investor or an entrepreneur or an accountant or whatever, or as a doctor, or maybe with something you're more passionate about, like music or sports or poker or chess or writing, whatever it is. And I think the skills of peak performance, I'm always learning more, and I just think it's very important in today's day and age where you literally have to choose yourself. 55 million people got laid off during the pandemic. No one is going to choose you. No one's going to be loyal. And so stick around after the podcast. Jay and I are going to talk about what we learned specifically from Henrik, a guy who's seen world championship level ability develop in front of his eyes. Again, it was fun. Congratulations to Henrik for winning our little match. And here's the interview with him, and then stay tuned I'm going to break down what I learned about Henrik's adult improvement techniques.
The way you guys play is like really exciting. The time is also like very, very close too.
Yeah, they were very exciting games. And Henrik, I knew you played that G4 against Knight F6. So I did prepare that. And I knew you also played the, after you played the H3 line instead of Bishop E2, and you played C4. So that's the line I prepared.
Yeah, and I understood, so I thought I'd better avoid that. And since it gave you the chance to outplay me positionally, and that was what I needed to avoid at any cost, basically.
Yeah, and then in the we had some good games. Like, I was upset losing the queen in the third game, but I knew that there was counterplay. I would get a good pawn center on the king side.
Yeah, but when I blundered my queen, that is really the only moment I'm a bit concerned about during the match, because that was so unnecessary. I mean, I had long seen this combination with rook takes h6, queen g2, queen g7 check and then take the rook on h6, but I couldn't do it as long as my king was on h2 because of knight g4 check. So I moved my king, and then I left my queen en prise after taking on h6. So apart from that, I think I was generally quite lucky in the match, but that was just nonsense.
Yeah, it's a blitz match, but like in the last game, I knew knight f7 taking the exchange was okay for me, but I knew you would get a lot of counterplay, and I was a little nervous about that. I hesitated before that, and you did cause trouble, and I got nervous.
Yeah, but then again, I blundered because frankly I missed queen takes f8 because I could have taken on d1 instead, and then then it's more or less equal maybe. Or okay, you have the h pawn.
You might be a little ahead there.
Well, you have the h pawn, but I have a lot of counterplay, so I thought it was okay. But then I blundered. In fact, I was exchange down, and then I just had to try to pose questions, and you were low on time, so I was a bit lucky there. But
that's a good way to put it, though. Pose questions, and I think a lot of chess is not necessarily what's the best move, but how many questions, even at the same time, can you pose your opponent, because maybe one of them he won't answer correctly.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've done a lot of interviews about your son, Magnus, the world champion. There's documentaries about it. People could listen to those. I might have some questions later, but I'm really curious, about a lot of other things. For the first thing is adult improvement. It seems to me you've been continuing. I know you've also taken breaks, of course, because you've been busy with Magnus and your other activities, but you're serious about chess, it seems. You play a lot. I see you play a lot, and you must get some tips every now and then from the players you surround yourself with, including your son. Do you see that it's possible for someone older to improve at the game? I didn't even know you were like a strong chess player until a few weeks ago when I was told that, but you're very strong.
Well, my strength is mainly in 5 minutes. I think my impression from these games is that you would be more and more of a favorite the more time we had for the game, but that's okay. And when it comes to making progress, oh yes, I certainly think that we can make progress, but to me it looks more difficult than earlier in life, and I haven't worked that much on chess. I mainly play it to enjoy myself, frankly. Although there are a couple of things that I've done to improve, and it basically, I think back in 2014 or so, my rating was starting to slide, and I played tournaments just maybe once a year or every second year, and that was not enough to uphold the classical level. So that winter I did 15,000 tactics.
15,000.
Yeah, and which meant a lot of them were repeated. Basically, it was on Chess24, and I think there were a couple of thousand that came over and over again, even though they were supposed to have like 15 or 20,000 different ones. But in fact, the repetition was a very good thing, I think, because you started to recognize pattern more consistently. So I could immediately, after these months, I could immediately see that in my blitz, especially, but also in classical chess, I was much more tactically alert. So at my kind of combination of age and level and lack of practice, that helped immensely. And then I felt if I wanted to continue to improve, one way was to start analyzing my own games. I didn't do that a lot, but to some extent. And then the third step is learning more, like opening lines, end games, etc. And I've done a little bit on that, but not that much really. It's somehow it hasn't been important enough for me to make progress. Like I know you working more consistently on chess, and I would need to work slightly differently.
But it's interesting.
I think
From an adult improvement standpoint, even in any area, let's talk about those first 2 points you made. That the first ways you're saying, one was repetition, then analyzing your games, and then studying theory, basically. But the repetition part's very interesting because I think there's a lot of neuroscience around the benefits of repetition, and you even have acquired, or your the Play Magnus group has acquired companies like Chessable, which focus on repetition in the learning of openings and other strategies. And the way you study tactics is sometimes called the Woodpecker Method, after a book by Axel Smith. And the idea is study, like, let's say 1,000 tactics, and then study them again, maybe even faster. And the idea is it puts in the brain, it kind of solidifies the synaptic connections between the neurons, and it helps with your pattern recognition, basically. And it's essential for learning. There's more and more research showing that it's essential for learning, as opposed to just mindlessly studying tactics forever without the repetition. And have you noticed that the repetition helps?
Absolutely. And therefore, I felt that doing these at Chess 24 at that time was ideal, because the total number of puzzles were so that I got enough, or the correct level of repetition. Like normally, if I spent 1 or 2 hours late at night doing tactics, I would have seen maybe after some time 40 or 50 or 60% of them before. Frankly, at the end, I could often have seen 80 or 90%. And that meant that when I encountered similar tactics, not necessarily the same, but similar in competition games, I would recognize them immediately. And I had a few examples of that already in the first Blitz tournament I played over the board after this period. And that was so rewarding in a way to see that, okay, I'm above 50, I've done some work, which was mainly fun anyway, and it made a difference.
What was the level of, like, were they complicated problems, or like what was the time it took to solve each problem?
They hit you with different levels of problems. I mean, some of them are quite difficult, but then you have a bit more time to respond and still get a good score. And some of them were just 2 movers, maybe. They were generally too difficult for me, so that I needed those 15,000 repetitions of a few thousand tactics, basically, to improve my understanding, my knowledge, and through repetition, getting these patterns more established. By the end, I was ranked around number 50 or something at Chess 24 on puzzles. I started at several thousands, or a couple of 10,000s probably. So, but again, because I recognized them, they were still a bit difficult for me. But when you recognize it, it's and I suspect that also applies to top players, basically, that some of the tactics are quite difficult for them as well, or extremely difficult, but they recognize something there, and that helps them.
One of the things I notice in Magnus's play is his extreme creativity, and that whether that happens in his positional planning or his tactical play, the creativity is it's hard not to just be astonished and admire how creative he is. And how much do you think, you've mentioned in prior interviews his amazing memory, how much of that creativity do you think, of course it has natural talent associated with it, but also he must remember so many positions from perhaps repetition, studying these games, good memory, that he's able to draw from these patterns in his head and play the way he does?
Well, frankly, my theory, and you can know more about the science around it probably, and you can evaluate it. It's based on that you get good at what you practice a lot. And his approach to chess from, let's say, 6 until 13, he went from a beginner to a grandmaster. It was a lot about sitting with the wooden chessboard in front of him and then repeating things he had seen or coming up with ideas, and kind of using his curiosity and intuition to look for things, basically. So it was much less a journey from A to Z, covering certain topics, than it was just reading books a bit here and there, looking for something that took his interest, or imagining things at the chessboard. So I would think, and from what I've heard from other top players, his approach during those years was slightly different from others, so that he practiced his intuition and creativity more than the technical aspects. Okay, later he became very good in endgames, but that might also have to do. You might not. I'm not even sure it's correct to see it as an endgame phenomena. It's more that endgame positions where his strengths somehow and training comes together. But okay, back to creativity. Shortly, I think he is so used to, through all these years, to draw on everything that is in the kind of the back of his mind and the kind of partly unconscious knowledge that you possess. And when he's in the zone and he's not thinking about consequences during a game, he will be able to draw on nearly everything that he has seen or thought about, because he's used to doing that.
Right.
While if you are more kind of A to Z schooled player, I think it's much more difficult to dig into those levels, kind of semi-conscious levels. But that's just my theory, that he has practiced so much what is needed to be creative at the board, and then it's easier to reproduce that state and those efforts at the board.
And I think you mentioned, curiosity is critically important. So whether it's business or chess or music, being curious, I think, being constantly curious about what else can be done in the current situation, I think is a very helpful technique. And like you said, I think if someone's just schooled, A through Z, they're not necessarily inclined to include that in their arsenal on a daily basis.
No, so at least it's maybe the story about there's a UK table tennis player who was supposed to be uniquely good standing close to the table, and then it turned out, okay, they had such a small room in his neighborhood where he practiced all those years, so he couldn't move, so he had to get good at close to the board. And I think whether you are forced to practice certain parts of your repertoire or you are doing it from inspiration, it's all about putting in all those hours in the conscious effort in the area, and you become very good.
Yeah, and I think the only way to do that really is to have a lot of passion for it as well, because it's not like it's necessarily fun. Like when this, and I'm sure Magnus knows this very well, when you lose, it's very unpleasant. And so you have to have fun through the unpleasantness somehow. You have to have passion through the unpleasantness.
Yeah, and we've of course spent a lot of time thinking about the psychology of losing and winning, because it's a difficult thing. You have these two sides of the coin. One is that it's a zero-sum game, and while humans take losses generally harder than you appreciate victories. So on one side, you want to have a strategy where you can appreciate your wins and not be psychologically affected too much from your losses. So you kind of, at least in your youth, Magnus was thinking, "Oh, I won, great," or "I lost, okay, I will try to win my next game, or find some interesting positions in my next game, just moving on." Now that's the one side. On the other hand, as a top player, I mean, Kasparov would have told you that, Magnus will tell you, I have to punish myself a bit when I lose, because it shouldn't happen. And it has to be kind of hard on me. I have to be hard on myself, so that the whole body and my own psychology learns a lesson. And somehow you need to be able to combine those in a balanced way. While from my side as a father, it's been all about kind of, okay, next game is the focus, not the loss. While Magnus himself, he has had to also kind of build enough resistance against losing, that he has the right psychological approach, like typically in extremely important matches like World Championship matches.
Yeah, and there's statistics out which show that Magnus, compared with other top players, tends to win after a loss much more frequently than others. And we don't know cause versus correlation. We don't know if it's because of the loss that he's bouncing back, but he does seem to, have put in the work psychologically to bounce back. Like, is there any specific kind of, that was very interesting what you said, that he has to punish himself a little bit in order to maybe bake into his brain whatever it was that caused the loss. But what other techniques do you think one should use to bounce back from something so painful as a loss, regardless of the game or business?
As you're pointing out, Magnus has a good score, typically the game following his losses. And I'm, as a father and a chess fan, I'm extremely happy about that, because to me, that's such an important thing. I mean, if you can handle that well, it must be a huge advantage. Now, why does it happen? My main theory for that is he is losing some of his inhibitions while being focused at the same time. If you are leading a tournament, or you are generally the one people want to beat, you're a bit kind of in defense, or even though you don't want to be. While if you have lost the game and you want to hit back, you are sufficiently focused after having punished yourself a bit, but at the same time, the cost of another loss is not as high. So I think basically he's just playing the odds game better after a loss, basically. Because most people, they want to kind of, they withdraw after a loss a bit. I think Magnus's approach is basically odds-wise the right one there.
You mentioned for your own improvement that studying your own games was very important. And I think this is critical. Like studying, and again, no matter what the field, chess happens to be the field we're talking about, and your son's the world champion, you're a very strong player, but studying your own games, it seems like that mimics as closely as possible the scenario that was happening during the game. And it's while you're playing, that's the actual skill. Whatever it is you're doing while you're playing, that's the actual skill you want to get better, as opposed to watching YouTube videos or reading books. Actually studying those and analyzing those games and coming up with more and more solutions seems very important. And you mentioned you do those for your own games. Do you do those for Blitz games? Because I do think that's how to make Blitz useful, is studying those games.
I've done it to some extent, but frankly, I have a significant amount of stress in connection with Magnus's chess. So when I play myself, very often I just want to have fun. So I'm clearly not putting in the hours and efforts I should generally. For instance, studying my own games simply to improve. So I do it occasionally if I feel like or have a lot of energy. But I think for a player at my level, it certainly makes a lot of sense. Well, it's also a bit individual, because Magnus, for instance, we had this discussion with Kasparov nearly 20 years ago, basically, where he told us that Magnus should study his game properly, and Magnus didn't want to. And then after some time, I think Kasparov and his trainer, they accepted that, well, Magnus absorbed the lessons from the game so quickly. Yeah, that he in particular didn't have to spend so much time, because through the games and right after, he immediately had absorbed at least most of the lessons that he could, and he was kind of ready to use it already the day after one of the subsequent games. So it's a bit individual, but certainly at my level, maybe at your level as well. I think positionally you're a much stronger player than me.
I don't know.
Why I wanted to play 5 minutes.
One day we'll have a rematch and we'll see.
Certainly. And so at our level then, if I may, I think it's really a way to improve, because especially in Blitz games, you will discover so much that you have missed. And if you do this, there will be patterns that you miss over and over again, and that's the way probably to pick them up and having them as part of your repertoire.
And again, it's a lot of it is related to the first thing, which is repetition. Because when you go over a game, you're basically repeating the game and finding all the deeper subtleties in it. So you're feeding your pattern recognition library in your brain. I sometimes feel like as I get older, my memory gets worse. And so the third part of your leg of improvement, which is, studying openings or studying end games, this proves to be a bit of a challenge. Although I like, Chessable, the company that's part of the Play Magnus group, it uses repetition in its courses. And so I think it helps. But do you find your own memory has suffered as you aged?
Clearly, probably more than I appreciate, really, because I turn 60 in March, but my memory has probably deteriorated more than what is normal at my age. I mean, I can see such differences from 20, 30 years ago. It's a huge difference. And that's a bit frustrating. And as you point to, it makes it a bit more frustrating to do some of the very useful exercises on chessboard, for instance, because you have to repeat more times than in the past, and still you mix up lines more than you did in the past. But on the other hand, at our age, or my age, I'm much older than you, I think.
I'm 53, so I'm catching up.
We are quite good at synthesizing information. So, and that's an essence also, I think, when you go through a lot of like opening lines. Maybe the most important thing is not even to remember all those lines, but to pick up a few good principles. Because again, I think you have to get up to a very high rating before it's that important to know all the lines. But studying lines will improve your basic understanding of chess. That's my view.
I think that's a good point, is that for someone who's older and has troubles with memorizing the same way kids do, it might be that, here's a collection of games that will be similar to games that I might play. And so I should learn the ideas in this collection of games, as opposed to memorizing each game, which was much easier to do when younger. But at the same time, I feel like, and I'm wondering what you think of this, what advantages does one have? Usually we don't speak of the advantages we get as we're older versus kids. And I feel like those advantages could be put into play in terms of adult improvement. Again, and I always have to repeat this, whether it's golf or music or investing or chess, perhaps the fact that we can synthesize from multiple experiences better than kids, our supposed wisdom.
Yeah, well, two things. One is that it is supposed to depend, from what I've read, where you are coming from. If you are played or did something in your youth at a reasonably high level, getting back there is not so difficult. And typically, they say that while if you start playing the piano in your 40s or 50s, you will never have anywhere near the technique or speed of a true professional. While if you were a true professional and just either kept it at some level, or you took it up at a later age, then you can become nearly at your youth level, even into your 60s or 70s. So for chess, it probably depends a bit whether how much chess you did in your youth. And if you did a lot, I think it's probably easier to because then a lot of the patterns are there. You just need to make them more useful in a way. While the other point I wanted to make is that it was a bit comforting to read a Economist article many years ago of how the brain changed, typically already in your 30s, and how the part that picked up details or data was reduced while the synthesizing part grew, the area of the brain used for synthesizing. So, and that's why I think older people like me, they sometimes feel that, okay, I don't know that much detail, but I have a little bit of wisdom that I didn't have at 30 or 40. And somehow we need to be able to exploit that in chess. And I think a lot of what we've talked about, whether it's repeating opening lines, tactics, or playing a lot of 5 minutes game and looking at least quickly through your own games to pick up some of the the patterns. Maybe we are still quite good at synthesizing certain pieces of information that can take us quite a long way yet, I think.
I've heard you say this in an interview, is that often Magnus will, when maybe it's, I forget if you mentioned if it was between rounds or sometimes between the tournament, he would focus on other things that he loved as well. So for instance, he's been number one in the world in fantasy football at different points. And it's kind of amazing to be number one in the world for two completely different activities. And so do you think it's natural to Magnus to be so great at things he tries, or is there meta learning happening? Like the fact that he knew the tools to be number one in one field allowed him to speak the language of being number one in another field?
I wouldn't go as far as the latter conclusion, but clearly his analytical training and his analytical proclivities, or what you call it, from young age, has helped him also in other areas like fantasy football or poker. Or I don't think it's basically the knowledge about how to become a top chess player that has helped him. It's more the training that he has had to get good at chess. Also is beneficial in some specific areas where you are collecting a lot of data, and it's not all about formulas. You have to kind of feel your way to some of the conclusions a bit intuitively, like you do in chess, based on some semi-conscious knowledge. Yeah, and also he spent a lot of time on fantasy football, frankly, and I think that's important for him specifically. It might not be as useful for other top players, but basically Magnus thinks about chess so much and more or less constantly that for him, between tournaments, it's a lot about trying to forget chess occasionally.
That's interesting. You guys also have been very successful, more successful than any prior group in chess, in monetizing chess. I mean, it's not just about winning prizes in chess tournaments. You have the Play Magnus group. It's public on the Norwegian Stock Exchange. You own a variety of companies like chess24.com, where you and I just played a match of chess, and chessable.com, which is a great place for courses. I think you own Aim Chess. Do you own Newen Chess? I forget.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're like a chess empire quietly. Oh, I realize many of my favorite chess related companies you guys own, and it's a public stock. It's the value is over 100 million. What got you thinking and inspired to kind of go this route in the business route? Was that your doing, or was what happened?
Well, first I should point out that our ownership of these companies are less than 10% now. So, but yes, we are a substantial owner, and I think it's basically a combination of several lucky factors. I think the chess world and chess industry was ready for some significant changes. And then this online boom and Queen's Gambit boom were clearly helpful to some of the companies that we are involved with. But the most important thing is that we met some very capable and hardworking people. We are fortunate enough to have a management group and a lot of talent throughout these companies. That makes all the difference. And of course, for Magnus, his main task is basically to perform and deliver results as a chess player. But clearly, now that we played on the new play zone today. So
yes,
when the new play zone is ready, I mean, he's looking forward to play there more as well. I mean, to have a home as a Blitz and Bullet rapid player. It's a combination of a lot of factors. Magnus was open to doing this, and of course, I've also been open to doing this, but we've had so much help from external factors and all these capable people that we have been fortunate enough to be involved with.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I could see in the strategy, there's a lot of sophistication. Often entrepreneurs they feel they have to build everything when they first become an entrepreneur. I have to build this, I have to build this. But you've been doing a good strategy of strategically buying companies that are the best in class for what they do, and then kind of rolling them up and integrating them into the bigger company. And that's strategy that was not obvious to me, for instance, when I was first starting out in business. It was only later on I realized the beauty of that kind of strategy. And you guys are doing it very well.
Yeah, again, we have capable people doing this and helping out with this. And it also helps, of course, that Magnus has been able to stay on top for many, many years now. So that we have a good name, attracting talents, and maybe also making it easier to reach commercial deals with some of these best in their kind of area companies that we've managed to acquire.
Are you worried? Like, let's say, Magnus has a world championship match coming up. Do you ever get worried that, he might, when does he get worried that, oh no, I'm in my 30s, the next generation, now these young kids, I can't take it anymore. These kids are machines. When does he start saying that?
Well, I think there was this story, maybe it circulated mainly in Norwegian press, chess press, but there was this Norwegian journalist that asked him nearly 10 years ago or 8 years ago or something, that, well, Magnus, okay, now you're on top, but at some point there will be some younger player catching up with you. And Magnus looked at him, what? Why? So he didn't accept that at the time, basically, that his time at some point would be over. And might read into that what you want, but it's a good self-preserving trait, I think, to have that kind of confidence or show that kind of confidence. Now, of course, now that he's in his 30s and he's had more ups and downs the last 6 years than, for instance, from 2012 to 15. So he understands that it will get harder and harder to stay on top, but he still thinks he can do it. So,
but I mean,
I think he's optimistic still for the match, for the year, and maybe also the years to come.
And this goes along with what we were saying initially about the different aspects of adult improvement. Like, I notice in a lot of Magnus's games, he often seems to be not going for the best theoretical position, but maybe even a position that's equal, or one where he might even be, according to the computer, tiny bit down, but he's more comfortable with. He's much more familiar with the ideas, while all the other opponents might be just super booked up on theory. It seems like he has a different approach to the game that he's introduced into the game.
Yeah, I think you're right. Although he has been quite well prepared also for the last couple of years. So maybe his game has changed slightly again compared to typically the early 20s, his early 20s and mid 20s, which you refer to. But it's clearly a strategy. It has been a strategy and is still a strategy that he strives for positions that he likes, where he sees opportunities. And I think very often, if you look at the computer evaluation, it doesn't tell the whole story. I mean, you have, for instance, people look at end games and they say, "Oh, it's 0-0. It's going to be a draw." No, come on. Maybe one of the players have a tightrope and the other has a wide avenue.
Mm.
So, of course, there's a big chance that the guy on the avenue will win. And also sometimes evaluations change. So, I mean, that's probably some of the highlights of Magnus' career from my point of view, when he is showing the computer that it's wrong. It's typically because the computer hasn't had enough power or time, etc., of course. But like you had one of these games against Vishy Anand, where he had this knight h3, knight d5, and after queen h6. And the computer didn't understand it immediately. Mm. And then he did it, and then, oh, okay, now I see what you're doing. And and then it made sense.
That's very interesting. And does he ever look at your games and make fun of them?
Yeah, and I like that. In fact, he says things like, he doesn't know anyone spending so much time on chess as me and playing so poorly. And I guess he wouldn't say that if he really meant it. I think so. And he thinks that my tactics are not so bad, but positional understanding and the king's safety and these kind of things, he's just kind of, what's going on? So I think he's just accepted that I'm at this level where some of it looks like chess, but then there are other parts that doesn't really resemble chess at all from his perspective.
What was it like for you when you made the decision, okay, this is going to be my career. I'm going to support Magnus's efforts and see how far we can take this. And I'm sure you've been asked this a lot. I apologize, but for my audience, this is new, and your style of parenting obviously has been very successful, but this was a big decision for you.
I'm not sure it was, because it was an opportunity to do something I enjoyed so much. And while I did decently in some jobs in the past, in the oil industry and as a consultant, being able to work with Magnus, who was excelling in his field, that was so special, basically. And if I in any way could help him realize his talent and make spectators occasionally happy, etc., it made so much sense. You have to also think that as Norwegians, both my wife and I coming from middle-class families, this was the way to raise children in Norway, basically, allowing them to pursue their passions. You're not so worried about their economic future because Norway is an egalitarian society with a strong social network, etc. So it all came together in a way that made sense. And again, as a passionate chess amateur, it was not very difficult to try to help Magnus instead of doing something relatively mediocre in other areas.
So in the US, it's hard to just think about your passions, or maybe it's not, but here it's like a fight for survival in many ways because it's not an egalitarian society. And I wonder what you would say to an adult, again, someone closer to our age who's tired of doing their daily grind every day. How could they pursue or even know what their passions are? And I know this is a big question, but I wonder if you had any thoughts on that.
No, I mean, I couldn't even see, for some years, I couldn't even see Magnus's talent as a chess player. And that was a good thing because I didn't push him. When he started taking it seriously himself at 7.5 or 8 years, it was kind of his chess. So I didn't interfere that much, which could have happened if I had understood earlier. But again, apart from that, it's so difficult to assess the talents and opportunities of other people. I'm just happy that we were fortunate to grow up in Norway and things came together and Magnus could pursue his career and it all went well, at least from his chess standpoint. So I wish people find passion. And I think if you have a job that you don't like in particular, maybe still having a hobby that you're passionate about can be so important.
Did Magnus ever rebel as a kid? Did he ever say, I'm not doing this anymore? I'm 11 years old. I'm going to go out and play soccer or football.
No, but that was the beauty of it. He's never been forced to do anything in chess. Anything. He was the one pushing. In fact, at one point, he wanted to play 3 tournaments in a row in the winter at 11 or 12 or something, or at 13 or 14. And my wife and I say, but then you're going to be away from school for like 2 months, 2.5 months. No, it's too much. I think we think you should drop that middle tournament and be in school for a few weeks. And he was so angry with us because for once he was not allowed to prioritize his chess. Basically, he's been always been pushing. It wouldn't work otherwise, I think. On the couple of occasions where I have maybe thought that he was on the wrong track, fortunately, I kept my mouth shut and he proved my thoughts wrong anyway. It's his chess career, and it's always been his passion. If he didn't want to play chess anymore at 12 or 14 or 16 or whenever, that was his choice, totally.
That's a great way to look at it.
We didn't have to burn any bridges, basically.
You know what's always amazing to me looking at Magnus and also the group of top players is that they sort of grew up together. I mean, even when he was 11, 12, he was playing in tournaments with all the same people he's playing now in world championship matches against. And I wonder what that's like to spend most of your life with the same cohort that's like growing up together and getting better and better. And now they're the top 10 in the world or top 20 in the world. Like, is he friends with them? Does he call them up at night and say, hey, how's it going?
Well, if you look at the players born in 1990, I think I said already in 2001 or 2002 that this must be the strongest vintage ever, even maybe by far. And yeah, okay, you have Karjakin, Magnus, Lagrave, you have David Hovell, you have Andreikin, Nepomniachtchi, Karulin. You have a lot of additional grandmasters, strong grandmasters, born in the same year. Such a strong year. I think you have to ask some of the others, because for Magnus it basically worked out. I mean, if you are successful, it's not that difficult in the sense that you don't experience the same problems that people do who have less success, basically. So I think when Magnus first played in the world, the European and the World Youth in 2002, in the European Youth, he lost against Nepomniachtchi and also, I think, the two other Russians, in fact. And then he did much better in the World Under 12 a month later. And in the end, he was second on the same number of points as Nepomniachtchi. They had drawn their individual game, but Nepomniachtchi had the better tiebreak quality point. And to him, this was just such an interesting journey that prior to playing abroad, he had read about some of his contemporary, and now he could suddenly play them and test the level. And then I think he enjoys the fact, basically just enjoys the fact that there are a lot of the same players among the world stars that he grew up playing occasionally. For me, it's something special when he plays Nepomniachtchi in a world championship match. I mean, I can still remember them playing billiard or maybe even some tennis, and talking a bit maybe 20 years ago. And now the boys are grown up and ready for the title match.
Do you know all their parents?
Not very well. Spoken a bit to some of them, but not that much. And frankly, Magnus didn't go to that many youth tournaments. He played both European and World Youth in 2002 and 2003. But apart from that, it's not been much really.
And as for you and your continuing improvement in chess, I understand you enjoy playing for fun, but obviously you like to win. I know all too well now, and so I'm sure you probably continue to do tactics. Like what would you say, even to have maintenance of your abilities? What work do you do to keep going, perhaps to keep improving?
I think you need to play a lot to do maintenance. To keep improving, I have to put in more of the slightly harder work of going through my own games, looking through and repeating opening lines, and doing tactics occasionally. And now I have to do all three of this because I have to be ready for our rematch at some time.
I know. I'm going to have to do. I've been using Chessable in read mode, which is not the repetition aspect, and I have to start doing that more to stay up on the openings. And 15,000 tactics. That's a lot to do. I'm going to have to start. I do about 40 or 50 a day. I usually do it from the Polgar book of tactics. His big book Chess, Laszlo Polgar's book, and I should put in the quantity as well. And I like the woodpecker method, the repetition as well. So you're good tactically. And you caused me a lot of trouble. You made me very nervous. I was shaking.
Thank you.
And
It was great fun.
Yeah, no, it was great fun, and I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. And you're welcome anytime. And I look forward to the rematch. But also, good luck next month in or whatever it is. I think it's next month, the World Championship match with Magnus, and everything you're doing with the Play Magnus group is great. Like Chess24 is a great site. Chessable, great site. Aim Chess is a great site. New in Chess is a classic magazine that is now under your umbrella. The Play Magnus trainer, I have that on my phone. It's very interesting. The exercises you do there. Some of them are like almost reflex kind of exercises, which I find very interesting. And what other companies are under your umbrella? I forget all of them.
Well, we have iChess.
Yeah, right, iChess.
Yeah, and the Play Magnus apps, of course.
Yeah.
The US Chess, the Silver Knights Academy.
Okay.
And have we forgot anyone? Well, in such case, my friends in the Play Magnus group have to forgive me. We mentioned a lot anyway.
And I thought of one idea for you guys, which is every score sheet in the upcoming World Championship match. I'm not sure how familiar you are. It's hard to get familiar with this, but the whole NFT world inside the crypto world, you should take every score sheet and make that an NFT that you sell online. And it's very interesting.
Don't tell anyone.
Oh, okay. But that would be a fun idea. No. So I would be first in line to buy one of those score sheets. And then, of course, you make more money as people resell them later, as opposed to when an artist sells a painting, you don't make any additional money. But this has some interesting features, and it can maybe even, if you buy such an NFT, it could provide access to other parts of the Play Magnus group that people might not be aware of. So it's an NFT is almost like a ticket as well. So it's interesting from a business point of view.
Yeah, I forgot Everyman Chess, by the way. Now I recall. But NFTs, I really have to figure that out, because some of these new concepts are difficult to understand fully. But when we were presented, like with the NFT trophy after the Champion Chess Tour, there's something to it. I mean, it was quite fascinating.
Yeah, and that's as a trophy. But even as like a score sheet, those are fascinating, I think. And maybe with Magnus's commentary on it or something like that, or I don't know, there's something about it that seems to be very appealing from an NFT point of view, both as art and both as access to other parts of the Play Magnus empire. So that could be interesting. Yeah, if you ever want a tutorial on that, I'm happy to set that up. But again, once again, thank you for the match. It was so much fun. I was very nervous beforehand, and it was good fun games. And you played very well and won the match 4-2, fair and square. So definitely a rematch is on the cards. But I'm gonna have to get better. After I do 15,000 tactics, I'll call you up.
That's a deal. It was such a pleasure to play with you and talk to you. Thanks a lot, James.
Thank you. So that was interesting. I mean, I really thought, first off, having played Henrik, and it sounds like he did do some studying as an adult a few years ago in order to get to the level he's currently at. He's a very, very strong player. What was very interesting to me was two learning techniques he spoke about, which I think is critical no matter what you're interested, whether you're interested in music, investing, entrepreneurship. And the reason why people don't do these things is they're more difficult than it seems. So number one is do or study what you love, your passion, but use repetition. So for instance, if you play the piano, obviously, two types of things people do use repetition on if they play a musical instrument like the piano. One is they repeat their scales, so they learn the chords and the scales and so on. The other is, they have different ways of repeating and practicing over and over again the pieces they would like to play. In chess, a lot of people just play game after game or study game after game, but they don't use repetition at all. They just study new puzzles, new games, and so on. But it's very important to kind of bake into your brain patterns. It's not good enough just to exercise the muscle that solves problems. You have to be able to catalog problems. So for instance, I remember when I was first starting as an investor, if a stock dropped, I would get scared to death. If a stock dropped really fast, I would get scared to death. And it was only by seeing situation after situation, when a stock drops, I started to see, oh, whenever it drops very fast, it tends to bounce back. And that was a pattern that I then used software. I wrote some software to test my theory, and I built a whole trading system around this, and started a hedge fund based on that, and later on a fund of hedge funds. But by studying the similar situations, not the exact same situation, but similar situations over and over and over again, you start to build an intuitive feel so that when you see a new situation, you say to yourself, oh, this pattern, this reminds me of another pattern that I've looked at. Same thing happens in chess. If you study, let's say, a tactical puzzle tactical puzzles over and over, and then you repeat them. Let's say, as Henrik said, he would study 1,000 puzzles, and then he would repeat them. So he wouldn't always remember the answer, but he would start to build an intuition in his brain on typical patterns that he saw. So if you want to be a mystery writer, you read a ton of mysteries, and maybe they're all kind of detective mysteries. And then when you're writing your own detective mystery, you run into a problem, you're stuck, and you say to yourself, okay, well, in this type of situation, I often have seen the Elmore Leonard or the great mystery writers out there do X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to try to do something similar to that because I know it will be good. There's something very interesting about patterns in that the human brain wants shortcuts. The human brain is not a computer. It can't calculate 1,000 moves ahead. It can't see every possible outcome for everything it does. So it wants to say, this is a 200,000-year-old thing. Oh, I'm in this area of the jungle I don't know about, and I hear a rustling, and the rustling sounds like something I might have heard before. Oh no, it's a lion in the bush. Or maybe the hunter picks up some fruit, and it's like it's about to bite into fruit, and it's like, you know what? This is similar to another kind of fruit I saw someone eat, and then they died. So it's poison. So the human brain wants shortcuts. It doesn't want to have to reinvent the wheel, so to speak, every time. And I know for my own adult improvement, like whether it's writing, chess, or investing, or poker, is that it's very important to study similar types of situations over and over again so you build the intuition. Don't just solve random problems all over the place. That will exercise your ability to think and solve puzzles, or solve problems, but it won't teach you the patterns that the brain really needs to have to take shortcuts in whatever area it is you're trying to get better at. The other thing is, which is very important, Henrik said, and he said he's not so good at this, but I don't know if I believe him. Henrik said, study your own games. And in particular, study your own losses. That applies to investing. So investing, you could have a day that was good, or you could have a day that was bad. You lost money. Or it could happen with entrepreneurship. Many people start companies and they fail. And in fact, I think not only should you study your own losses, you should study other people's, but you'll definitely learn the most from your own losses. And I think people don't do this. It's hard to admit. People make excuses like, oh, this business didn't work out because my business partner screwed me, or this business didn't work out because the customer went out of business. Well, you can't make excuses. You lost. And it's critical to do an autopsy on every aspect of the loss. Why did you pick that business partner? Why didn't you notice they were screwing you? Why did you let most of your business be dominated by this one customer? Why did I make that particular chess move when I knew that in this type of position, this type of chess move is made? Why did I do that chord change in a piano piece I was riffing on when I knew that doing this other chord change 1,000 times I've seen it, and it's makes a much better piece of art, and on and on. But it's hard to analyze your losses again because of excuses. Like if I lose a chess game, I want to say to myself, no, that feels so bad. I just want to go on and play another game and win so I don't feel so bad anymore. But here's how you have to think of your losses, and losses in life in general. This even includes in personal relationships. A loss is like a roadmap of where you are weak. And it's the only roadmap you're ever going to get of certain weaknesses. Every time you lose, whether it's a day of investing, a relationship, a business, or a chess game, these are very specific roadmaps to things you don't know or things you're not good at. No matter how many excuses you have, oh, I just made a mistake. I will never make that mistake again. Maybe you won't, but I have found, like I played in my first tournament in 24 years, about a weekend ago, and I have another one coming up in 2 weeks. I played 8 games. They did not go very well. Many skill sets I have lost about over the board slow playing. But what I've been doing is I've been going over these games one at a time, 8 games. It's been about a week. I've only gone over 2 games, and that's a couple hours a day of examining these games. My notes on game number 1 are about, 10 to 15 pages. And not only that, I went over them with a coach, a grandmaster named Jesse Cry, who's a very good grandmaster and a very good teacher. Sometimes we'll spend an hour or so going over one of these games, and we'll only go over the first 8 moves because there's so many things where I could possibly be better. And examining these and doing an autopsy on your losses, if I had won the game, I wouldn't know where I had played poorly. But when I lose the game, it's very clear I played poorly somewhere. So doing an autopsy on that and really studying and examining both the moves, the psychology, like what was I thinking when I did that? What are other similar games that have been played? And what did Magnus Carlsen play, for instance, when he was in a similar situation? Studying those games. Sometimes the guy I'm training with, Jesse, we would set up the position and he would say, okay, play black. Now, okay, play white. And we would go back and forth. So I would try to learn the ideas and plans from each side. And I thought I knew them. I thought, I was going to win this game. I just made a blunder, or I wasn't used to playing a slower game. But there's always, the only way to get better is to practice what it is when you were doing the thing you want to get better at. So I was playing, so practice simulating playing, but instead of losing, try not to lose. Try to understand what it was that made you lose. And I used to do this with investing quite a bit, particularly when I started to deal with the psychology of losing. I used to hate losing money. I still hate losing money. And as Henrik said, it's important for even his son, Magnus, to still hate losing. Not be a sore loser, but to feel the pain so he knows to punish himself. In a sense, he knows that he needs to learn from this and not just ignore the loss. And you only get that when you feel the pain of loss. So the pain of loss, as unpleasant it is, if you're trying to get good at something that's worthwhile, that pain is worthwhile, and that's how you get better. So I can't stress enough, whatever it is you're trying to learn. When I would do comedy, when I did stand-up comedy, and I still occasionally do it, but not as much as I did from 2015 to early 2021, I would videotape myself doing comedy. I would think to myself, I did great tonight, or I did horribly tonight. And I would watch the video, and I could see, oh, no, I should have made the joke a half a second faster, or I should have paused a half a second more to let the punchline sink in, or I had such a great opportunity to do some improvisation right there, and I didn't do it. And I would write down notes for each video so I would learn, so I could read them later and learn, and again, build intuition in situations that I wasn't so good at. And the greatest comedians out there, what would they tell me about when I asked, how do you get better? Take videos of your comedy events, take videos of yourself doing stand-up comedy, do an autopsy of them, and figure out how you would do better, write it down, then improve, and so on. Videotape all of your sets and write them down, write down your notes and analysis and move on. And I have to say, in almost anything in life that I've gotten better at, the most painful situations are the most valuable ones. Even relationships. I have a relationship that didn't work out. I could moan and groan and get depressed and do all sorts of crazy things. Or I could say, well, what went wrong? Why didn't I see these aspects? Or how didn't I treat this person as well? Or how didn't she treat me as well? And why did I allow that to happen? And on and on. You need to, again, always think of, don't ignore the pain of a loss, but think of a loss as a roadmap to your improvement. We only live one life, so we might as well improve in everything we love doing. I love having relationships. I love doing stand-up comedy. I love business and investing and entrepreneurship. I loved playing chess since I was a young person. And I love writing. With my writing, right now I'm in a period where I'm looking back at things I wrote 10 years ago when I was already publishing lots of books, having lots of success as a writer, making money as a writer. And it's always interesting for me to see now how I would do it better, particularly books where I think I didn't do as well as I could have. So it's just a fascinating thing. I think Henrik's very right about that. Solve problems, but repeat problems. That's number one. Repetition is very important. And number two, sometimes when I'm a writer still, but sometimes I would write articles and then I would write the exact same article with the same ideas over again just to see how I would do it differently. And that was because I wanted to improve. Or I would try writing over and over again an article in the second person. Then the next article I'll write in the second person. The second person means I use the form you instead of I. So you woke up today, you turned on the coffee machine, you started looking at the stock market and it was terrifying. And honest, you use the word you and it creates a weird type of effect. That's not the point here. The point is that I would try to write many articles in a row in the second person just to learn that form. And if you're interested in that, Chuck Palahniuk, the author of Fight Club, and we've talked about this on our various podcasts together. And then learning from your losses. I can't stress that enough. For 24 years, I don't know what the heck I was thinking. I would just play Blitz Chess online, and I never studied my losses. And Jesse, grandmaster, who's giving me lessons right now, Jesse Cry, he would tell me, you have to analyze your losses. You have to analyze your games. And so now that's all we do. That's the entire content of our lessons is, and again, I have 8 games to analyze. We've been spending almost a week a game. I take 3 lessons a week and I study several hours a day and I write notes down. I have tens of pages of notes on one single game. And that's how much you could learn from losses. And I as a result of doing that, I could see the results right away when I play Blitz Chess. The slow chess is making me better at Blitz Chess because I'm analyzing putting many more possible ideas in my head by seeing all the possibilities in the games that I lose. And again, if you remember one thing from this, your losses in life are the roadmaps to your future victories. Your losses are the roadmaps to your improvement. And why not improve?
See, I have questions. I felt like, we have interviewed Henrik like just earlier and Judith. I get one thing in common in both episodes is that the visualizations of learning. He also talked about. I remember he talked about Magnus Carlsen just sit in front of an empty board, and then he also talked about be curious about. He also talked about be curious. I'm wondering if you actually done that for your tournament.
No, that's a good point. Well, curiosity, yes. And that's almost the subject of an entire other podcast, because curiosity in general, a lot of people think, and let's just talk about this in terms of education. A lot of people think, okay, if I major in biology, I'm going to know biology. And the answer is yes and no. And even if you get a master's degree, because I'm going to distinguish a master's degree from being like a PhD or an entrepreneur in biology, science, or whatever. But if all you do is take courses, all you'll know well is what they teach in courses. And what Henrik calls curiosity, for a mini second, I'm going to call it discovery. Because I think if you're not discovering things, you're not fully learning. Because knowledge is a commodity. It's at our fingertips. Google, if I don't know the elements of the periodic table, I could just ask Google. But if I want to know, sodium mixed with chloride forms salt, I need to discover that. It's not as easy to just look up the elements on the periodic table. And in chess, there was one game in this past tournament where I could tell there's only one game out of the 8 that I lost immediately, meaning I lost it in the opening because the kid I was playing, the man I was playing, had studied that particular opening more than I had, and he memorized it better than I had, and I completely lost. And it would be good if I had been able to discover, even when I knew I was going to be in trouble, discover new ways to play based on my understanding of that sort of position. Or let's say something happens in the investment world where I don't know what's going on. If I could discover my personal approach, this is what I do in this type of investing, and I study that approach, and I discover what my unique voice is in investing or in writing or in business, then I think that's what creates the real champions. Is that, like, take Serena Williams with tennis. It's not that she became a great tennis player. It's that she changed tennis. She was so good that she moved the frontier of how we define tennis. Now, I'm not going to do that with biology or chess or investing or whatever, but I can do it for myself. I can move the frontier of what it means for James to be a good chess player or a good investor or a good entrepreneur or a good writer by discovering what new things I want to say and new ways I want to say it. And when I say the word say, that could mean as an entrepreneur, it could mean as a chess player or as a musician. Whatever it is we love, we're saying things with that domain. So discovery, and you discover things with curiosity. Well, this person, it seems like everybody plays this move, but what happens if you play this move? Oh, it's not so good, but it's tricky. So maybe it'll be my discovery that I'll play this and other people won't know how to deal with it. And that'll start to move the needle on how I'm discovering myself in this area. Or, you're supposed to write a book this way. Well, what if I write it this way? Maybe it's not the classic or traditional way, but it's going to be my way of doing things. So, for instance, when I started writing about business, this is in 2010. I was writing about business before, but I was writing about it in a very standard way. And then I started writing about business by saying, you know what? First thing I want to say is I went broke several times. So I've been a horrible business person. I've been a horrible investor. And I was so depressed. I lost all my money, and I was so depressed that I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know how to survive. And I even was suicidal. Well, I would say now this is a common way for business self-help authors to write. I don't consider myself a self-help author, but I see a lot of other authors writing this way. And I feel for me, though, this was my discovery by combining sort of the style of writing I really enjoyed to read and write, and my own honesty and analysis of my prior situations, plus combine that with traditional business writing. So I would be very offbeat. Like, people would read my articles, like on TechCrunch, for instance, and the first comment would be, "What the hell did I just read?" Because I had my own voice. And again, I think people, the world grows up and people start to share and do also imitate the style or mimic the styles that they like. And a lot of people like that style of writing. So it's almost like you have to rediscover yourself continuously to stay ahead. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but curiosity and discovery is an important part of analyzing your losses also.
Yeah, but the other question is, like, do you visualize? Do you practice visualizations? Well, because that's what Julie Pogat said, right? When he was younger, he would just play blind chess.
Yeah, so it's funny. The way I do it is when I solve problems, you have to visualize sometimes several moves ahead. But I think practicing blindfold chess and that kind of visualization, I probably should do more of. So I don't do it as much as I should. Although I do practice when I look at a book, I try not to set up a board. But since I want to learn the contents of the book, sometimes I can't see too far ahead by myself. So I have to set up the board.
Yeah, but because you did say about repetitions help. You want to practice the muscle, but sometimes you want to. I felt like in order for you to build that muscle even stronger, you have to bust out whatever you learn from the repetitions. You have to bust out whatever you learn from the muscle memory or on the muscle to sort of improve on wherever. Sometimes you have all these tools in your bag, but you never use it for a long time. You just forget they are there. You know what I mean? I'm not sure if that makes sense.
Yeah, and so my hope is that it helps me build my pattern recognition. So when I'm playing an actual game, I know what to do. Okay. So it's like, okay, I get in a game. It used to be maybe in a certain position. I didn't know what to do, but now I might say, oh, you could do this, 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 and so that's why studying slow games almost makes you better at faster games, because it gives you a bigger sort of repertoire of plans. But you're right. Like, I used to study playing blindfolded. In fact, when I was in college, I was a freshman in college, the Cornell Chess Club was not so good. And I remember one time, they were good. They were all rated players and stuff. But I remember one time I played 5 of them simultaneously while blindfolded. Like, I used to be much better at blindfolded. And now I haven't played blindfolded since then. And so you're probably right, Jay. I probably should bust that out. It reminds me, it's like in poker. So when I used to play a lot of poker, I would talk with my poker friends and we would talk about different hands, and you'd have to visualize. Now, it's not the kind of visualization that's in chess, but you'd have to say, okay, there's 7 people at the table. Yeah. 6 of them have this hand, this hand, this hand. I have this hand. This comes out, this comes out, this comes out. what do you do in that situation? And so we would talk over hands like that, and you'd have to visualize everything. And that was very helpful, talking over these hands with, or looking at hands in a book. Like there's a book by Gus Hansen, who's a great player, I think it's called Hand by Hand. And
Gus Hansen has a book called Hand by Hand. Who would have thought?
yeah. And he's an extremely aggressive player. Somebody told me that his style doesn't work as well anymore. Because again, people learn styles and that you have to grow up with the world. But you have to, I would have to visualize that. I wouldn't like deal out the cards. I'd have to visualize what he was saying. And that was helpful. So practicing visualization helps. But again, when I solve tactical problems, that's kind of visualization, because you have to look like 5-6 moves ahead to find the solution and make sure you don't make mistakes. And there's a whole tree of possibilities in those 6 moves. But playing a full blindfold game would be a good challenge for me now. And on the different chess servers, the different places online you can play chess, there's an option to play blindfolded. So I should probably try that.
Yeah. Maybe just practice it. Yeah, because like the reason why I brought this up is because like, you know, like I'm Asian, English is my second language. So a lot of time when I read books, you know, I study, you know, like dictionary or books or whatever, and then if I don't use them, I just totally forgot I ever read that words until I read that words again. I'm like, oh yeah, I know these words, you know. So
well, this is why repetition is so important, because let's say, I mean, and Stephen Dubner, who wrote Freakonomics, and we once had this conversation on a podcast when he was on, where how much do you think, like, I'll ask you, Jay, when you read a nonfiction book or even watch a YouTube video, because a lot of people get their learning from that now, what percentage of the book do you think you remember?
Oh, I know the answer is 10%. I generally depends what type of book. I generally retain like maybe like 15% to 20%, because like,
okay, well that would be incredible because first off, 10% is not the correct answer. It's more like
really?
1 or 2%.
Oh, really?
Turns out to be the answer. And so the important thing about repetition is maybe the second time I read it, I remember a different 1 or 2%. Maybe the third time I read it, now I remember 5%, because the dots are starting to connect. Like I realize how things start to connect in the book. So take a great book, and we've had Robert Greene on the podcast a bunch of times. He wrote the 48 Laws of Power. He just wrote the Daily Laws. He wrote the book Mastery. I find when I reread one of his books, I remember more each time I read it. And I think I would have to reread the 48 Laws of Power 20 times to fully appreciate how great that book is. Or take Chuck Palahniuk's book, Consider This. It's a book about writing. It's probably the best book ever about how to be a better writer. I would say that book would require a good 20 readings before I fully get it, because I only remember 1% of the time. But you start to build the pattern. Oh, this is his style of advice. Even more importantly for me, as a writer, there's a book of short stories written by a great writer who sadly passed away a few years ago, Dennis Johnson. It's my favorite writer ever. There's a book called The Writer's Bookshelf, where they ask famous authors, who's on your bookshelf? He's the one author who most commonly appears. In particular, this collection of short stories, his first collection of short stories, Jesus' Son, about like a drug addict guy. That book is on more bookshelves than any other book. I've read that book probably between 200 and 300 times, maybe more, because every time I read it, it gives me new insight into how to be a great writer. It's Jesus' Son by Dennis Johnson. And so repetition's important. Studying, other greats is important. But again, the most important thing is when I look at my own writing and try to figure out where I could have done better, or when I watch the video of a comedy set, or when I go over a chess game. Like, I'm looking at these games with Henrik right now, and man, I miss so much. I can't wait. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to go over some of these games with Jesse, and we'll see where I could have done better. But some places I played very good and was tricky, but some places I got lucky, and some places I just played, not so good. And I need to learn if I want to be better. I can't just ignore these games and just say, oh, they were just blitz games, or, oh, I was nervous for the match. I have to see how I could. Let's say the only reason I lost is because I was nervous for the match. Well, psychologically, I need to learn how to be less nervous. No, that's not the only reason I lost, but every excuse is an opportunity to learn as well.
Yeah, no excuses, but also, sometimes it's good to have excuses.
No
too,
excuses, and I definitely feel the pain, although he won a hard-fought match, 4-2. It was the final seconds of the last game. It was almost 3-3 if I had pulled that one out, but he was a very tricky guy. He's a very tricky, sneaky guy.
Right, yeah, so now you play the dad. I guess I'm just excited when you're going to play the son, Magnus Carlsen.
Yeah, I don't know. I would say this. Several years ago, and this is on YouTube, I played Garry Kasparov, who has since become a good friend of me, and his wife's a good friend, and we just went to a conference, the the Oslo Freedom Forum or Human Rights Foundation. I forgot the official name, but went with him. But we played a game, and he destroyed me, of course. And I would say now, looking at that game now, because I looked at that game a few weeks ago, I understand why I played so poorly. And at the time, I wasn't even curious why I played so poorly. So it's just a different attitude I have now about improvement in this one domain that's been part of my life ever since I was a kid. And that's, how you take something like chess or art or music and make it have benefits in other areas of your life. Tell me, actually, I'll leave it to the listeners. Tell me if that's something you would be interested in. Like, let's say, you always did gardening. How can you use gardening in other areas of life? Not even just in selling things, but I have found that chess has changed my life in so many ways since I was 16, 17 years old when I started playing in tournaments, that my life would have been completely different. Even though I'm probably now not that much better than I was then, it's changed my life. And I only wish I had continued learning, but of course I learned other things. And I hope everybody enjoyed this podcast plus our extended outro. And let me know what's on your mind. Like, tweet at me on Twitter, and please subscribe to the podcast, leave a good review, share the podcast. I really like feedback, and it really helps me a lot if you share this and or review or subscribe or whatever. And I want to know that I should keep doing this. Sometimes Jay and I are doing this in like a closet, and we don't know who's out there. Jay's in a closet, and actually I'm in a closet too. We're in two separate closets. So, but thanks.
They have a lot of different meanings, but yeah.
Yeah. I used to actually do this out of a closet when I first started. Now it just feels like a closet.
Yeah. I remember. I heard all those episodes. I'm like, oh, I'm so glad that you came to the studio. I'm so glad that I be on board, and then just turn your podcast, around.
Yeah, you've gone from audio engineer to full-fledged producer. So you've been doing self-improvement yourself.
Yes, thank you.
And you do a great job. Jay just booked. I'll look at my calendar, and suddenly there'll be Eric Schmidt, the ex-CEO of Google, is coming on next week. There's another coincidence there too. So there's 3 authors. It's Eric Schmidt, Henry Kissinger, and a computer scientist author named Daniel Huttenlocker. So the coincidence is he's like a huge computer science guy now. He's like, I don't know, chairman of something at Stanford or MIT and chairman of the John D. Rockefeller Foundation and blah, blah, blah. Well, he was, my last year of undergrad, I majored in computer science, was his first year as an assistant professor.
Oh.
So there's just a weird coincidence in that book. But
do you know him in person?
Yeah. So, but he probably wouldn't remember me. I was undergrad, and he was teaching computer vision, which I guess is his connection to the AI world. But I didn't take computer vision. But in any case, Jay just puts these amazing guests like on the calendar and somehow books them. So thank you, Jay. And
thank you.
And once again, thanks to Henrik for coming on, and congratulations to him. And good luck to Magnus on his upcoming World Championship match.
All right. Thank you.